We're all set.
Welcome, everybody.
It's good to see everybody post-hurricane. Hope everybody fared okay. And it's nice to see your faces. I know we've got a lot going on today. I have a long meeting stacked with important information. So I want to go ahead and open the meeting and get started. And if everyone has had an opportunity to review the minutes, if I can get a motion to confirm the minutes in a second.
Second.
All in favor? I know we don't have old business on the agenda, but we do have some really important new business. So I do want to turn it over to Rachel for the county update to get started.
Sure. Sarah and I were just chatting about the location of the slides. They're in our collaboration folder. So hopefully you're able to pull them up. It's a little surreal to be back together. We already all had that thing where time wasn't feeling like it was moving the same through COVID, and now with the layer of Helene over top of that, it sometimes just feels like we're floating. Anyway, we've been thinking of you all, and hope everybody has been making your way. My presentation today is going to be to share with you about what Buncombe County government has been up to since we met last, and take us to where we stand now. It's 2025, and our clerk to the Board of Commissioners has invited us to reopen our boards and commissions, reconvene. Part of the reason that we were not meeting regardless of topic was that many of us were off doing staff reassignments, doing response-related work, regardless of the topic of the committee. So typically this committee would have met. We were finishing, kind of finalizing what our grant programs were going to look like for fiscal year 26, and we were going to wrap that up in November and then open up an application in December. But now it's January and we haven't done that. So that's going to be the main point of conversation and discussion today. I want to put I don't want to bury the lead. I want to say right out front that the county leadership is looking to have a funding cycle for the coming year and have it be recovery focused. So Sarah is going to talk with us about that. The county manager is looking to this committee as the one that is the most broad and inclusive across all topics and would be best situated to carry out a recovery focused funding process. Not to mention the other thing that we were talking a lot about in the fall was the pending adoption of a new strategic plan, and we were going to get those new focus areas to tie our grants to, but that is on the shelf and has not been rolled out. So even if we weren't shifting toward recovery, we would need to go back to the drawing board a little and figure out what our focus is. So that is where Sarah is going to facilitate some information sharing and conversation. But until we get there, I will start us with Helene updates in general. You may have seen an image like this before, and it's fairly logical. We have disaster preparedness that happens year-round. Some of us have, filled our bathtubs ahead to prepare for a power outage. We may have some this weekend too, so not a bad idea. All the different things that households and communities do to get ready for an event. September 26th was when we had all of that rain from like the the storm, before the storm, the Wednesday, and then as we went into Thursday and Friday, that's when the tropical storm, by the time it hit us, Helene joined our community, and we went into emergency response mode. Depending on the employee, where they were during the state of emergency and emergency closure, varied. My own experience was in warehousing, right? And I just made eye contact because we were on the phone a few times here and there. Buncombe County ended up standing up 3 different warehouses during the course of this emergency that were getting things in from the state and distributing to partners, but also receiving donations from the public because the food bank had not been operable at that time. And other partners were at capacity, so county government was doing individual donation, receipt and distribution. So there were all these emergency response things that were going on, and I'll talk more about what those were in a minute. What's a little different about this disaster, as we listen to all of the experiences from those who work professionally in the field of disasters, is that our response, our emergency period, was much longer than usual. And part of that seems to be related to prolonged water outage. So we had business closures and school closures and potable water concerns and all of those things that went on longer. And by nature of the scale. This is cited as the worst disaster in North Carolina, maybe the worst hurricane in North Carolina that we've experienced in the state. I don't want to quote across nationally because I'll probably get it wrong, but it is classified as level 1, like one of the biggest ones. So ironically, something that happened to make it more complicated is that our recovery ended up kind of starting earlier than what we would see in a lot of disasters. There's this program going on right now that you all may have seen in the news or applied for or helped someone apply for, called Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. That's the one where if there's a property owner and they would like to apply to have the government buy them out or help them elevate their structure, they can apply. It's funded through FEMA, administered through the state, and there's a local government role. That program usually takes, from what we hear, a good 18 months from the disaster before it's in place. But that has already been, as they're back on site in Buncombe County at the Disaster Resource Center, the one that's in the mall, taking applications for their second round. We already have somewhere around 50 applications that are being processed up to the feds. So the recovery stuff is happening earlier than we expect typically, and the response stuff has been lasting longer. So this might actually be a sort of a flattened out disaster timeline. But nonetheless, what the picture tells us is we have the emergency or immediate response. We have long-term recovery, which could be, 5 years, 3 years, 10 years, depending on what specific category you're talking about. And then there's all that in between, which is pretty much smack dab where we are. I dropped the pin just past the immediate response, but we still have 4 community care stations with them that are offering showers and laundry. We are still operating a warehouse on Old Bee Tree Road, and that means our emergency operations center, which is on the 2nd floor of this building, still has some of those daily kind of logistic things that occur. Next slide, please. In putting this together, I thought back about all of the sort of different phases that we have been in, and I did not prepare this ahead of time. In fact, I had it in mind that this meeting was a 1 o'clock, and so I was just sitting at my computer making these slides when Sarah was like, hey, are you on your way down? So this is by no means a complete list, but as I look at it, again, that thing about time, like, remember when we couldn't send texts or make calls and we had these safety and wellness checks going on because we didn't know a good way to tell who was okay, and there were rescues going on and sheltering. I think Buncombe County operated 4 or 5 different shelters over the course of the event. The Ag Center was a big one. The last of the disaster shelters closed on December 31st. There was all kinds of meals and feeding operations going on. The warehouse that we had on Monticello Road was water and MREs, just in and out, in and out, in and out, going, receiving them and getting them out into the community on a 24/7 operation. As the days went on, we started going around and doing damage assessments, looking at the condition of people's homes with them and roads and the bridges, and making initial repairs so that people were able to pass. Not everybody has access to their home if they're private or their bridge is washed out. That's some of the stuff that is gonna linger. Some of this stuff you're gonna see in emergency, and then when I flip to recovery, it's still there because it takes a long time. Debris removal is a great example. Next slide. The state of North Carolina has worked with FEMA and various other federal agencies to produce a recovery needs assessment that articulates some recovery outcomes that set the sort of big picture vision for what we want to see as we put together a long-term recovery strategy for our local community. Next slide, please. So this is a look at the recovery framework that we're using, sort of a graphical way to see. We've defined certain recovery categories by studying the federal categories and the state categories and what other jurisdictions use, and see what makes sense here. For each of these categories, there's task forces and work groups that are meeting and working on whatever needs are presented within their category. So I'll use debris as an example. The work group members, as much as possible, we've taken an intergovernmental approach. So we're at the table with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Environmental Protection Agency and the state partners that are counterparts of many of those, along with the town of Woodfin and Weaverville and Black Mountain, et cetera, in our approaches to debris management. And they sort of set the different goals of things that they want to work on, which I'll go into some detail on the next page, have these regular meetings, track progress. They're still in kind of short-term planning. We did like a 90-day initial plan. We'll see how things look as we get further out, hopefully being able to plan in longer chunks of time. The other thing I want to say is we're working with community-based organizations in each of these where it makes most sense. The Economic Revitalization Table is kind of City of Asheville, Buncombe County co-facilitated and has a lot of different community partners at the table. Same with behavioral health within health and social, and you can imagine how that might take shape. And then that center part is really about trying to make sure that we've got the foundational infrastructure internal to the county to manage the data and the staffing considerations and the grants and funding to enable all of this. It's a complex operation. Next slide, please. So for each of those recovery support functions, I've listed some examples here to give a better sense of what is being worked on within them. I will pick on debris management as an example because I think it's fascinating. The initial focus has been on the public right of way. The items, like some of it is vegetative, trees and stumps. Some of it is like the construction and demolition debris. So there was a whole special mission to get black bags allowed to be accepted at some point. White goods, the various things that have made it to the public right of way. And so we've been communicating with the community about the items that can be safely brought to the curb and how they can be picked up. And that has quite a lot of different levels of both government and independent contractors all working to make that possible. Now we have one going on for private property where people can sign up to have the items removed from their own properties, commercial or residential, and demolished prior to removal where necessary. Waterway takes a little bit longer because of all of the environmental reviews involved. If there's an endangered or threatened species or a special cultural site or something of that nature. So waterway should be coming up soon. And then there's all the various things about like, how do you get the titled property? Who's going to tow it? How do we do the DMV checks? And how does insurance fit in? And where do you put the stuff when you get it? So we have temporary debris staging sites in various parts of the community, but those are temporary. And then where does this stuff go after done being like counted and sorted and checked for safety? Fascinating and complex. Was part of the emergency response. Will be going on for a while. Probably not something that's going to fit in our grant world because it feels like it's kind of contained, but maybe I wouldn't want to sort of count it out because I could imagine some of our river partners fitting in. We've funded some of that work in the past, and I know there's volunteer cleanups already that have been occurring. So I actually could see a nonprofit bringing forward an application. Anyway, health and social services. Any of you that work in that field might recognize these as the social determinants of health. That group has decided to align their efforts there. So if you imagine the efforts that are going on with mental health in schools or, the feeding and the food assistance, there's places for that to nest within the health and social services work. And again, each one of these kind of reflects a structure where there's leads and work groups and tasks and all that good stuff. Infrastructure, their categories are listed there. That hazard mitigation grant program that I mentioned is part of their wheelhouse, along with what to do about all of the landslides and stabilizing slopes. Floodplain management has to do with regulations to stay in compliance with the National Flood Insurance Program. Structures that are in the flood, near the river, in the floodways and in the floodway and floodplain. Economic revitalization, there's been a lot of initial aid. Our unemployment numbers are quite staggering as a community, going from the lowest in the state to the highest in the state, pre and post tropical storm. Housing is another very, very active group with lots of layers of activities. Their overall focus is getting people to more permanence. There are initial shelters. There's FEMA's kind of package of aid where they can provide rental assistance funding. They can do direct rental, like helps direct lease a place for people if they can find one. They provide units. those like travel trailers or manufactured homes, both types, I think are in play. Yeah. Which are being placed on private property, like somebody could have one of those units placed on their own land while they rebuild. They've adjusted some of the housing regulations, as has the state, to allow for temporary housing, so they don't have to meet all of those same codes, like housing codes, so the permits and inspections will allow the safe placement of these, helping folks navigate through the repair and the rebuilding process and the various opportunities for funding. Not all response that's happening related to housing is government response. And not all government responses, FEMA response, because you might have seen this, the new governor did an executive order also about housing, and they're expediting the placement of some temporary units as well. And we've definitely seen active nonprofits in our community that are providing housing solutions. Our approach is to make sure that the ones that we're supporting are going to be connected to power and connected to sewer or septic in a safe way, so that they're going to be safe and stable until the permanent solution comes along. There will be some opportunities to advance goals that we already have as a community around affordable housing, and responding to homelessness, which was a pre-existing challenge. And under natural and cultural resources, that watershed protection, Angelica, I called it watershed protection instead of emergency watershed protection, because Ariel was like, this program takes about, I forget how many months to get going. So it's a misnomer, but that's what's there. And if you all have been watching the presentations of the Board of Commissioners and Solid before, you might be wondering, where's education? They're nesting under the Health and Social Services recovery support function. At this point, it's I think we've realized that having it as a standalone group doesn't make as much sense as this based on our available staffing, et cetera. So that is the recovery support functions and topics. Let me look at what happens that we're doing next. I think this is a good place to stop for questions. The last slide I have after that is going to tell you what the financial outlook of the county government is looking like right now before we segue to the grant conversation. So it was a lot of talking.
Thank you.
Thank you for all that work. It's been a lot of work.
It has been.
No, okay.
Yeah.
And to give an idea, Rachel has been living, eating, breathing, drinking this world. She was tapped as one of the main staff members to support recovery for the county. So she has been doing all of that work on top of directing the strategic partnership department.
Yeah,
Lots of
so
work.
I'm serving as recovery lead. All of the people that you would see on the chart are essentially Buncombe County personnel who are doing that as part of the course of their regular work, like floodplain management is already a function in our planning department, so that makes sense. And then others are essentially staff reassignments. So TBD how long this configuration looks. At this point, I'm looking from here to the end of the fiscal year because I'm a bureaucrat and that's how I think. So. Okay, next slide, please.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah. The Board of Commissioners will be having a budget retreat on the 16th, which is next Thursday. It's sort of an all-day affair where the boards of the school boards, Nashville City Schools, Buncombe County Schools, and Welcome County Commissioners are gonna joint meet in the morning and talk about the school consolidation feasibility study. And then they're gonna talk financing and budget as a 3-party meeting. And then the county commissioners will meet in the afternoon for their regular budget retreat. And I don't want to go into a lot of detail because it's really the budget directors to make public. And we have been talking with all of our partners really openly about the financial picture. We know that we have a lot of extra costs that we have incurred that are disaster related. That's not our primary budget driver. While it has a cash flow concern because a lot of those things are reimbursement, and reimbursements through FEMA can take a long time. So we're navigating PA, which is public assistance, and doing the best we can to be as likely as possible, get reimbursed for everything that we request. But that's all kind of happening in a separate fund, if you will, from our regular county budget, which is, pop quiz, how big is the county's general fund operating budget? Probably ballpark 400 million. I'm not the best at memorizing numbers, but that's all kind of separate from the Helene stuff. For our regular operating budget, we know that we will not receive enough revenue to cover, we won't receive the amount of revenue we budgeted, that we planned for. We don't know how much less. And part of that is because of the lag on sales tax reporting. That the most recent we have is October, and it's significantly down from the prior October, but we don't have November and December. We know we weren't collecting fees on certain things during Helene, during the state of emergency for, I think it was a state law or reg, that have just been reinstated as of January. So that's additional revenue, and then property tax. Your guess is as good as mine about what property tax collection rates will look like. If we know we have many hundreds of property owners that are asking for a government buyout, will those property owners also be paying the property taxes this year? We know we have very high rates of unemployment, so families experiencing joblessness or lack of interrupted income, will they be able to pay the property taxes? So those are 3 of the big chunks of how we get general fund money for the county. So we are busy for our current fiscal year instituting cost-saving measures. Again, just so you know, we have not gone to any of the strategic partnership grants and asked them to revert or cut within their funding. Sarah and Angela did talk with all of them about their ability to carry out their projects now that, or in light of Helene, that's the grants in light of Helene. We offered, in the spirit of flexibility during the state of emergency, so that nonprofits were able to keep operating and serving their communities, that they could build their initial emergency response, if you will, into their funding. And then as we got a month in or so, we got back to looking at the regular plans on the projects. The vast majority were prepared to carry it out pretty much as originally planned, and there were a few adjustments. I don't remember off the top of my head if there were any reversions. We haven't looked to strategic partnership grants or any of the other grant programs that our office manages to ask for funding back. We have made some changes to some contracts. We have eliminated travel and training for employees. We have put a freeze on hiring. There may be an exception or two, so if you hear of people getting hired, 911, we're going to keep staffed. But in general, we're trying to, at the county manager's direction with input from the commissioners, create savings wherever we can. That will have an impact on the community. You might notice different hours of operation at some of the programs and services, or longer wait times for certain programs and services if we have fewer staff to do the work. We brought in some extra staff to help through a firm called Tetra Tech, who's our disaster recovery firm, but they're really only doing disaster response on things that are specifically reimbursable, so that we're not having to incur a lot of extra expense. That's for this year, the one that goes through June 30th. So FY26, that's the year that we would have opened our application for in December, and those grants are effective as of July 1. What we have said is we don't know what our budget is going to be looking like. It's not reasonable to assume we'll have a flat or stable budget year over year. The strategic partnership grants may or may not have less money to work with because of some other behind the scenes things that we're doing. So I mentioned wanting to focus our efforts on recovery. That means that we're thinking about not putting forward some of the smaller grant programs like the Tipping Point grant or the Community Recreation grant. So the actual dollar amount that would be available within strategic partnership grants for FY26 is always a question mark until commissioners have their process. When I was talking with the Early Childhood Committee on Tuesday, I conveyed we should anticipate a cut. I don't know if that's the same here because we're going to be pooling a few different programs previously budgeted separately into one. So at this point, not knowing what we don't know, we can focus on the process itself and figure out the dollar amounts once we know. So that's for your awareness about the financial climate we're operating with.
Rachel?
Yes.
So if not knowing what we don't know, totally recognizing that, but in conversations, the pooling of multiple programs or a couple of other programs, potentially with strategic partnership grants, is that seen as a one-year thing or an ongoing thing? Thinking about the first slide about the length of recovery. Sorry,
We'll
to go
see.
that way for you.
Yeah, we'll see.
Just an open question.
Commissioners will need to look at everything that's discretionary within the county's budget and make choices how to get through the next budget cycle. We don't budget on a multi-year basis. So part of it may depend on how the economic recovery does. And priorities with new commissioners. We have 2 new members of the board that have just joined within the last couple of months. So priorities change.
Do you have a figure on how much has been spent on the recovery so far?
We do track that. If
Out of curiosity.
Sarah wanted to go to buncombecounty.org/transparency, are you still connected?
Sure.
We have a dashboard, a Helene spend tracking dashboard. And we have spent 10,300,000 plus so far. And there's a listing of all of the expenses that includes. And you can kind of look at it by category. I think if you look at encumbrances, which is obligations or contracts, it's twice this. So entered into an agreement and have a commitment for future payouts, but this is what's actually been sent out the door as of now. Yeah. Buncombe County, no, BuncombeReady.org is the website where people can go for information about any of those help programs, those aid programs. So if you heard me say hazard mitigation and you want to learn more, BuncombeReady.org. We will probably also, at some point, have a home recovery website. So we're not there yet.
So we've got some decisions to make, some things to look at. Looks like the timeline is up first for our next steps. And there was a possible timeline sent out if everybody had a chance to take a look at it.
Yep, I have printed that out along with the draft application so that everyone can look at that in real time.
It's one of those magic puzzles. Have you ever done one?
No.
It's a fun puzzle brand if you like puzzle. There's really unique shapes to the puzzle pieces. And it's an interesting piece of artwork. And when you finish the puzzle, there's a way to sort of slide it open and complete a second surprise puzzle inside of that.
No.
It's wonderful and horrible at the same time.
They're designed to be shared around, so let Sarah know if you want to be on the list.
So I'm going to do my best to project. I have whatever crowd is going around right now. So I don't have the full voice that I usually do. But first and foremost, I want to welcome everyone back. I know it's been a long time that we have not been able to meet, and there have been a lot of back and forth communications between staff and this committee. Hoping that we could get things moving and then feeling stalled again with recovery efforts or emergency efforts. So it feels really good to be back in this room with everyone and have such a good turnout here today. Dr. Russell is on Zoom with us. So I want to make sure that if she has anything to add, she is able to do so. So the first thing that we want to talk about today is just looking at the proposed timeline that staff has come up with, given that we would have normally already opened applications for our FY26 grants at this point. They were set to open in mid-December. Obviously that did not happen, as we've been kind of trying to figure out where we stand, when we can have the committee gather again to make decisions, having county leadership weigh in and provide updates on kind of the budgetary view, the financial view that Rachel spoke to everyone about. So we have finally landed in a place where it's new year, 2025, and we finally have some answers to be able to move forward. Things will look a little bit different this year, but the plan is to open the strategic partnership grant and have a little bit of a condensed timeline, but still be able to make funding recommendations in order to provide funding for that July 1st, 2025 date for the new fiscal year. So The timeline that you have in front of you shows in detail the dates that we have been looking at as kind of milestones to ensure that we can get this grant program off the ground. You'll see where we are right now is the January 9th special meeting. And the next thing on there is January 17th, which is the proposed time that we would open applications. That is next Friday. We were looking at doing it on the 20th. That's a holiday, so we want to give as much extra time as we can to applicants, knowing that it's already going to be a little bit of a condensed application window this year. So applications would be open from January 17th until the end of February 28th, when they would close. That's 6 weeks for applications to be open. It's a little bit shorter than we usually do, but it's not too much. Like, there's still, I think 6 weeks is still reasonable to accept applications, especially since folks are rearing and ready to go. They want to submit their applications now. After that application deadline, we would only have, this committee would have 1 month to score applications, which, as you all know, is a heavy lift. Usually we do give more time for that. Usually between 6 weeks and a couple months, maybe. A month is not a lot of time, but we're hoping that this committee feels that that is still doable, given the circumstances and the importance of getting this funding out this year. We would then have that scoring deadline be at the end of March. And we, again, would have a couple committee meetings in between that end of March and end of April deadline, when we have to get funding recommendations to the budget office. So that would be the opportunity for this committee to, again, figure out those funding scenarios and come up with the final funding recommendations for awards. Since it is a shortened timeline, condensed this year, we are proposing that this committee excludes follow-up questions. That's something that is talked about each year as a potential. Some folks are more interested in that, some folks have more issue with it. But because a 1 month period is so tight for you all to be able to score, you know, that turnaround for those follow-up questions usually takes a couple weeks, and we just don't have that this year. So I wanted to make sure that that was clear as we're discussing this timeline. Staff is still prepared to do grant consults with applicants. So we would open that up during the application period. And we're ready to go with information to get out to our community partners, since we know that everyone is, again, ready. They've been very, very, very patient. And we want to make sure that we're getting information out as quickly and effectively as possible. So those grant consults would still be available with staff. Again, for those who might need a refresher or are new to this process, the grant consults are with county staff. So typically myself or Angelin or potentially Rachel, folks can sign up via Calendly. We have a link. They're usually 15-minute phone calls or Teams video calls, where folks who are looking to apply can talk to us about potential project proposal, any questions that they might have in terms of like eligibility or fit within the fund, or any other questions that they feel aren't answered within the grant guidelines or what we have posted online for them. So that is something else. Angela just corrected me. It's up to 30 minutes for the grant consults. I was cutting time short, sorry about that. So we are still going to do those. I think it's really important that staff is still available to do that. Again, staff is able to do that because we are not scoring or evaluating the applications. We are here to support this committee in doing that. So we're kind of an unbiased third party in this this scenario where we can give a little bit more guidance or insight. So that will be something that staff offers once again. So that's kind of a broad overview of what the timeline looks like that we're proposing at this point. As Rachel said, the other thing that we're looking at is moving forward with a bit of a different use of the fund this year. So typically, the Strategic Partnership Fund is utilized for support of the county strategic plan. There are the focus areas that give guidance regarding priorities for funding for the county that this fund provides. This year, I think last we were talking about the updated strategic plan. That has all been put on pause at this point due to Helene recovery efforts and emergency efforts. So between that and the dire need in our community for direct Helene related recovery efforts for projects directly impacted by the storm, we are proposing that this fund for FY26 becomes kind of a special recovery fund. So it wouldn't be for those strategic plan focus areas. It would be for the recovery categories that we looked at on the screen earlier. And this committee we thought was the most equipped to be able to review those applications and look at that, those projects that are coming in for recovery needs due to the breadth of knowledge, experience in the room. This committee is already intentionally made up of folks who have interests and experience and skills in a lot of different areas within county priorities areas. So we feel that you all are very equipped to be able to carry this out. For the more technical things, staff is involved. There's plenty of county staff who are eyeball deep in the technical recovery needs and can obviously provide support for that part of any projects.
Yeah, how that looks is something that we've given a little thought to, but we'll need to think a little bit more about. We don't want to put this group into the position of trying to make judgment calls on areas that you don't feel like you've got the expertise in, and knowing like how this relates to some government program. Like, is this truly a need? Some of it we're gonna listen to the applicants describing of how this fits in their applications, but also I think that some level of like staff comment or staff notes, kind of like how we used to do each year as part of budget. I think we could have staff notes on the project plan as well, just to add some of that context that we might notice from our vantage point.
So
The slide notes.
We have, I guess we're just working on a paper handout copy, but we have extras. If guests would like to follow them.
So any questions, thoughts, concerns on this proposed updated timeline, which would be a quick on-ramp to getting the ball rolling?
Sarah, I'm still gonna go over the application itself.
It's still gonna be in for the month we have review in the same way it was last year with
The grant portal.
Yes,
Yeah,
portal,
everything will
that's the-
still be in the same grant software system. We'll give reminders and instructions for all of that so that everyone feels prepared to use that again.
Given that the county priorities focus areas have changed, has outreach already begun, considering that the on the different organizations involved?
Yes, so that's definitely part of the plan that we have been trying to.
The answer is no, we haven't been doing outreach, we've been stalling.
But
Community organizations that know to contact us this time of year and go to watch our website. I didn't introduce myself to the next number, but I'm guessing they're associated with community organizations that might be applicants. They're ready to hear what the plan is, and then we'll have a condensed timeline to spread the word to others. But we do, we've got our distribution lists and we'll do our best.
I appreciate when I uphold my commitment to making this timeline. I would just want, since it's potentially a different organization than mine, I would just hope everyone can get the news as soon as
Absolutely.
possible.
We will strategize with the team that Angelica works with, which is the communications and public engagement team.
The only concern I have about the shortened timeline is the number of applicants. But it sounds like, and I may have missed some of this, that the scope of applications is going to change and there may be fewer applicants related to that. Is that what I'm hearing, or?
So unclear. You're correct that the scope is going to change because we are requiring that all applications, all projects be directly correlated to impacts from pollution. That also is widespread in our community right now.
Yeah.
So a lot of organizations are facing impacts directly related to Helene. So we don't know is the answer. There could be an uptick in number of applications received. It could be a more kind of like specialized group of applicants this year. We don't really know.
Hard to say, but if you look at the category of health and social as an example and think about a lot of the organizations that often apply, I can see a lot of the types of work that I know that they're doing fitting.
Yeah. Would we think, I mean, this may not be a popular recommendation, but would we think about not doing health and social related so that other investments, where the money is in healthcare is in insurance. And if we can use other resources to pay, if we really push a strategy in our region to look for resourcing where there actually is money and use the county resources where there isn't that opportunity. Just something to think about.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point too, Dr. Russell, with, we do still have other grant programs that the county manages that are specialized. We have an affordable housing grant. We have an aging services grant. We have an early childhood education grant. Those are all still running as normal pretty much, as far as we know at this point. And as we have it defined in the application right now in the grant guidelines, folks could not apply for the strategic partnership fund for those categories. So like there's a category of housing that is one of the recovery categories, but we have a fund for that. So, it would have to be one of those, like pick one or the other situations.
Are there other opportunities for people to seek funding for like business development or for environmental cleanup related needs, or are there other project opportunities for people?
So at this time, this is the only open application from the county government.
Okay.
The others that we are trying to maximize are from other funders, philanthropic or state or federal. So we would anticipate those coming in.
Yeah.
From the business perspective, we have already run the Mountain BizWorks first round of grants. They expect to open a second round of grants. That is not confirmed yet, but that is another economic opportunity that the county helps fund. But from just social media and what we're hearing from the community, rental, mortgage, and utility assistance continues to be a daily hot topic. And programs come for, a month or one set of payments. But those we've heard consistently from the community, rent, mortgage, and utility assistance. That helps.
Yeah, I guess the thing I would think about related to that is, again, optimizing the use of healthy opportunities for Medicaid eligible individuals in our county. Because that is a covered service. So looking at opportunities to cover people who are outside those categories.
Yeah, and you'll be excited to hear how much we've been promoting the use of NC Care 360 for the community-based long-term recovery groups use, for the, I don't know if we've made a win on this one or not, but the state is running disaster case management with federal money and trying to get, ironically, asking the state to consider the use of this platform.
No, Dee Dee's had her hand up for a while.
So, but if you are interested in applying for a grant and you just read this straight up here it says you don't accept for applications for housing, early childhood education. But in the list of things that are covered, housing and early childhood are covered. And I understand what you just said about you have to choose, do you want to go through the early childhood thing but I think that we need to make it more clear
I agree.
because it looks contradictory.
We're gonna fold education into the health and social services one in general. And we can remove the references to early education.
Well, but are we letting them apply for a grant for early education or childcare?
I think no,
Okay,
because there's a separate one for that.
so they just go to, but housing is gonna be double covered.
Yeah, that's the one that I have question marks about.
But can we just make it clear somehow in here that there is also a separate agency for grants for housing and you need to pick between this applying here or applying there?
We'll work on that.
So
There's list that, they can only apply for one.
Before we move into looking at the application, I just wanna check in again about the timeline. And maybe it would be helpful for us to move through the application and look at that as a whole before we make any decisions. What do folks think? Yeah, okay, great. So I'm going to put this up on the screen to make sure that Dr. Russell can see it as well. Great. So the first part of the application is basically just a really basic overview of what we just talked about in terms of this year. The proposals are going to look a little different for this month. Specifically for community-based projects working toward aiding our community and recovery efforts from Hurricane Helene. Again, we will have the grant guidelines published soon. We have a draft of those ready to go based on what this committee decides. And per Mark's comment, we are looking to get communications out as early as tomorrow morning to community partners so that they have all of this information. We have the deadline currently as February 28th at noon. And I'll come back to the scoring areas because that's a whole other discussion. But the first thing that you'll see on the application is the normal acknowledgement, did you read the grant guidelines? The second thing that you'll see on here is new to the application, and we've talked about this a little bit before, the demographic data project that we've been working on as county staff. And this is something that we've been working on for the last year plus to try and get more data from folks looking to apply or applying for county community investment grants to ensure that we are equitably distributing money in our community. So where we're at with this is we have a demographic data form that we're currently finishing up. This is something that we have kind of a county subgroup working on, as well as we have a countywide community investment grant work group. So that's everyone who manages a community investment grant for the county is part of this conversation and has been giving input into what this form would collect. And every single community investment grant would utilize this form. So we are at this point highly encouraging applicants to complete this form. At this time, it's not mandatory. It's kind of part one of a two-pronged phase. The form is more like a survey at the beginning for anyone applying so that we can get a better understanding of who's applying. We're also including in that first survey information about geographic area. So that's kind of where we're leaning towards, or like pushing that geographic data to land. I think it'll be really helpful in this way to be able to map things out instead of putting it just in one grant application.
So do you have the demographic form?
Let me grab a copy of it.
I want to say, I've got a comment on the staff side that we may want to add that this information is, for the purpose of analyzing what community participation looks like in our grant programs, and it's not intended to be used for decision-making, for funding decisions. And I am one of the people that's been on the fence about whether or not it should be required. Today, I feel like it should be required because of that geographic thing.
Just to clarify, will this data be holistically attached to grant applicants that receive funding, future questions?
So
Holistically across the county, and we can also attach a copy of the survey response to your additional documents in your software.
Yeah, just for future questions, 2 years, 5 years.
It's funny, we've talked about this, I know, for 2 years with the geographic piece of it. And almost this time feels like that doesn't need to be a part because it's our county. And, like say Swananoa may have gotten worse, or like Oak Forest Riley beside theirs. It's just funny how we've all been differently in the same impacted by this.
So I'll just say in the form, it's very simple, this first one. It asks for the zip code that you're providing or that your organization works in. And it lists every single zip code. People can select all of them. If they work in all of them, they can select one if they only work one. And that will help us map things out easier. And we're also asking if organizations have previously received grant funding from Buncombe County to understand if they're new applicants or if they have been funded. Pulling back up, so they're going to self-select whether or not they have completed the form here. And this is something that once we get all of the data, we can report back to this committee with what that data looks like as well.
So
And just to say, Rachel mentioned the idea of putting in a line about this will be used for. Once that sentence is there, we really need to not use it for things we say we're not using it.
Yep, and I think, as Rachel said, this first part, like, we're not using this data to make funding decisions. The second part of the project, if you remember us talking about this, would be for those who are funded. So the projects that are funded would then be required to report on certain demographic related data to their project, specifically in their quarterly reports, or however often their reports.
Not to play devil's advocate, I agree with what Ray just said. I was holding back a little, but I just feel like I should say it. Because I just read an article that talked about how zip codes are the worst way to establish demographics. They were not designed for that. So I just want to put that out. I'll try to find a link to that article and share. There are much better ways to
That would be
determine
great.
demographics and issues.
Just definitely share the article. The form is intended to allow organizations to self-identify if they serve a specific sub or centered in, what's the language that we need?
Centered and empowered by.
Just a subgroup within the community, like veterans, like people of color. So there's one there, and then there's what geographic area you look in. So,
No, and I'm concerned, we gotta start somewhere. I was
Right.
doing this, that's why I didn't.
Yeah.
Spit that out.
we tried Commissioner District, we tried City County.
We've tried a lot of things.
School district, you know.
And like you said, Mike, this is the starting place.
Yeah,
Sarah, you've got a question here.
Oh, I was just gonna say, so now, just to make it clear, she just said, put a line in there that says we're not using this to determine whether you get the grant or not. So have we decided to actually do that? I mean, that seems like a suggestion, but are we gonna do that or not?
My desire for having a picture of what organizations participate in our grant program, and so that when we do outreach or
What, no, I was specifically talking about putting a sentence in there that says this will not be, I do think it would be very useful to have that information. But if we're not going to use it to determine who gets the grant, I think we need to say that. And so you suggested that,
I did.
and now, does this committee decide whether we're gonna say that or not? Or is that up to staff? Do we vote?
I feel like I should probably contact county legal to find out, because we're talking about demographics.
Okay,
So if an organization says, yes, we identify as affiliated with veterans issues, that it doesn't advantage or disadvantage them for having some.
Yeah.
So would it be reasonable not to share that information with the committee until after we score? Because it does seem like there's a little bit of overlap. So in applications, we'll say we're focused on veterans, or we're focused on the African American community, or I don't know, but maybe the cleanest way to do that is not to share those demographics with the committee until the decisions are made. That way you can be sure you don't take them into account.
We put it on the separate survey so that we work for every grant program.
what I'm trying to get at is who decides this and when do you decide it and how do you decide it?
I think staff will decide it based on the input in this conversation today.
Oh, okay.
So if we listen and the group is like, we feel really uncomfortable with that, or Liz makes that suggestion and others are like, oh, there seems to be consensus that that was a great suggestion. And we'll keep that in mind after we talk to the lawyers and figure out what we're allowed to do. what do y'all think of what was the suggestion?
I
Makes sense.
completely agree with Liz's suggestion. If we're saying we're not gonna take this into account, it's better for us not to see it.
And I'll follow up with you about whether we're forced into do it.
All right. So then, the next part of the application will look fairly familiar again. We asked them for their funding request. Currently, we have it in the grant guidelines as it normally would be for a strategic partnership grant, with a cap of $80,000 per project. The same requirements, if you had a project funded 3 times in a row, you're not eligible to have that project funded again, even though that probably wouldn't relate to this year's like specialized funding. I mean, it could not. If it's river cleanup, that might be a tricky one. That is definitely something that we wanted to run by this committee, is that $80,000 cap. Does that still make sense? Because I know that that's been an issue here before in terms of a balanced portfolio, ensuring that this committee is able to provide funding to the most amount of projects. In the past, when we haven't had that cap, requests can be quite large, and not knowing yet what our fund is going to look like in terms of a price tag. Ensuring that folks have kind of an understanding of the scale that the committee is looking for projects is important.
And that's a question that came to my mind, before getting here to this. Thinking about who's going to be applying and the level of financing it might take to complete certain type of project. Housing is not inexpensive. River restoration is not inexpensive. $80,000 only goes so far.
Those larger scale projects will have to look to the community block grant or the USDA funding sources or private fundraising in order to get what they need to accomplish this project. And this is likely to be smaller scale, staffing led kind of work.
Another thing that we haven't talked about yet today is there is FEMA funding available for nonprofits. There is FEMA funding available for organizations. It is a federal program with a lot of red tape, but that's also something that I think we as a county can potentially help point nonprofits to. Because I want to make sure that they are getting their needs met however they need to.
That's been a large county role in the past, is directing applicants to more appropriate funding sources.
Right.
And now you're already overwhelmed with everything you're doing anyway. Is it feasible for you to process quickly and say, hey, FEMA has something for you, rather than push you towards FEMA? Is it here? Is that like an overwhelming task for you guys?
I imagine a lot of that referral and support happens in the great consultation conversations. And so that is built in and we're planning that capacity for that, where any group can request a one-on-one chat with staff. We're not likely to pull proposals from here that are better fit for other things. The only sort of pre-review where we would pull a proposal is if we see it's in conflict with one of our own grant programs, like the Early Childhood Fund.
Thank you, because I was gonna say something similar to that, but I'll go ahead. You know, Mark, to what you said, 80,000 doesn't get you very far, 900,000 doesn't get you very far.
Yeah.
So it could be less than that, it sounds like it could be more than that if something's added in, we don't actually know. But regardless, it's gonna be in the ballpark, right? So, given the number of recovery categories, which is quite extensive, if we're getting applications across that, I'm still inclined to keep that 80,000 maximum limit, so we can fund projects, hopefully, as far as possible across grant categories. Does anyone want to eliminate the 80,000 maximum? Let's ask that as a question just to see if someone has it,
Or change it.
or change it.
You know, just because they ask doesn't mean that we have to give.
Absolutely.
And we can always, although it's a secondary question, can you, you know, if you got 70,000, well, how would it affect your project?
Right.
I mean, my first inclination when we were talking about this was to take it down from 80,000, just because we know that there's going to be a lot more applications this year. And so 60 maybe, 65, I mean, I don't know what the magic number is, but I do have concerns with an $80,000 cap that we're gonna be overwhelmed, not because of that, but we're gonna be overwhelmed with a lot of applications this year. But I can live with 80. I think we have to have a cap or something.
Well, and any time, that you are getting a grant, if you get a grant from one agency, that encourages other people to give you a grant. I mean, that you can sort of build, or you can have matching grants, or you can have, private individuals say, well, the county thinks this is good, then I'm willing to give my money to that. And so I think just because we put a limit on it, doesn't mean that limits what that program is gonna be able to, get for financial help.
If I may, the other part I was going to say is, I think echoing what Rachel was saying, setting aside within the county, I'm very dubious about saying, well, go elsewhere for your money. If it's in one of the categories and people are coming for money, they should be treated fairly, equitably within our process, rather than saying, no, you can go there.
That's why when will it become up in conversation if they're pitching us a large scale capital project?
Yep.
We'll express what this funding source can and can't do, and brainstorm with them about additional sources.
Do we know what our limit of funds to give out is? Do you know that?
No, somewhere in the ballpark of 900,000, I feel like is fair to assume until we otherwise, since that was last year's number.
All right.
So I want to be mindful of our time, to make sure that we get through everything here. But I do think that this cap is an important one to be in consensus on to move forward. So is $80,000 still a good cap, or per Ann's comment, do we want to lower it a little bit this year?
I don't want to chew up too much time debating it, because I was like someone that, I had a similar thought, but anything lower, but nothing keeping it in.
And
Just because they ask for an amount, doesn't mean we necessarily have to give them what they ask for. I mean, when we see what all the grants are and how much money we have, then we can figure out, you know, maybe we're gonna give a little bit less to this, so we can give some to over here.
Yeah, that's right. Partial funding is one of the levers that we need to figure out how to use when it's.
Yeah. Well, because, just like I said, then if they get some money, then they're likely to get more, have more chance to get money from other places.
So I'll add my voice to that budget trust amendment as well. These employees, I mean, my sense is we're gonna get lots of applications. And we wanna have the opportunity to fund more, especially, you know, some years we decide, oh, well, we're gonna try to give everyone the amount they asked for. And other years we decide to cut by priority score. So we can't count on those mechanisms necessarily, depending on what we decide, but I do think something like 60,000 would be a reasonable gap this year. It sounds like at least the three of us are kind of being.
Another argument for lowering the cap is that it does give the opportunity to disperse more money to more organizations. And the more projects we fund, particularly given the scenario of Helene, and the more community involvement we have, and the more physical community momentum we potentially get. If we have more projects going on, bringing in volunteers, creates more of a community momentum than funding a handful of other projects. That makes sense.
So I'm gonna give a counterpoint, and I think I might have been one of the earlier voices for putting a cap on at some point. But the reason I wouldn't would prefer not to lower it, let's language it that way, is actually speaking to what Dee Dee said. It gives us actually more, it enhances our ability to weigh in on where the greatest impact will be. There's a great program that's 80,000 that's just significantly better in terms of its impact. I'd rather fund that than a smaller size project to disperse the money more broadly that may have less impact. But if those are strong projects that are smaller, let's say 60,000, then we retain the ability to pivot and say that we're gonna actually have that as our cap. We've actually done that in some grant cycles where we said, okay, in the cycle, we're not gonna fund above this. The cap actually came out because we've done that for a couple of years and then said, well, let's make this public. So that actually gives us, it retains some weight because we really don't know what's gonna come through the door here.
What about having a standard grant, not like all grants are 50,000? And if we have $1 million, here's 20 grants. So that, the reason that crossed my mind was to big grants on a smaller scale is $100,000 for $5,000 grants.
I find that incredibly attractive as an idea. I just feel like we have a lot of, as you spoke to, and we have a lot of uncertainty right now.
Mm-hmm.
And like there may be some projects that are 30 or 40,000, that's not 50, and then they're shaping it into a $50,000 proposal, but it doesn't actually need that.
Just crossed my mind.
No, it's smart. Yeah, thank you.
Some of that might play out when we're going through, after we've done the scoring and looking at who we're selecting. Maybe we look at a top down and bottom up. We're gonna fund, the top 5% on the upper end, and then the top 5% of the lower end, and disperse evenly through the middle.
And just to be clear, and I hope I said, we're flooded with applications, and there are a lot of good applications. And then at the decision-making point, you say, okay, nothing's gonna go above 60. I'm perfectly comfortable with that, but that's retaining the authority to make those choices based on what's going to be.
And I think in the past, you've argued, or someone has argued, that we don't want to do that retrospectively, that it's only fair to the organizations that if we're going to set a cap, that we do.
Right, that's absolutely true. But and that's when we had actually set caps consecutive years in the decision-making process. Here I'm suggesting that we don't actually know. That we might have some strong things that really we do want to go to 80 with, and we're still maintaining that as our cap. But if it's a very different grant pool, applicant pool than we've had in the past, we don't know that yet. And so limiting us beforehand doesn't make intuitive sense to me.
But just as long as we're all agreed that we're not going to make a retroactive cap in deliberations, because I think that was a compelling argument that if there is going to be a cap, consider it the decision-making process that we tell the applicants that in advance and not make the decision after. So, I mean, I'm comfortable either way. I don't feel strongly whether we go to 60 or 80, and I feel like we've talked about this a long time. I don't know what else we're going to talk about. So maybe we should try to come to some consensus. I'm comfortable staying with it.
Do we have to publicize the cap?
That is what we've done in the past. And if we're gonna
And let
use
them
it,
put whatever they need, and then we're like, internally, we know.
If we don't, it really gives organizations a hard time to know what project is the best fit for it.
I just thought that when he said, they'll squeeze up to 50,000. Well, I can make this 50. I can tease this up.
Why
But
don't we just make the language you can apply
Up to.
for up to $80,000. Because I don't think I ever wrote a grant in my life that you tell me I can apply for 100, I'll probably apply for 100.
I
You know, but I never
yeah.
really thought that I was just gonna automatically get it, because you said I could apply for 100,000. So I think we say up to, that kind of.
Right.
It's like,
Up to $80,000.
And then maybe we include the language that, you may only get partial, apply for this grant, knowing you may only get partial funding. So that we have that.
We got disclaimers for days.
Yeah.
One other thing that I want to make sure that we're clear on, there was a rule, I think this past year, where we explicitly said organizations can only apply for one project for this grant program. Are we still keeping that? Yes. Great.
and I think last year we said no capital projects. You know, now it's like, a small capital project, we can't fund big capital projects, but I wonder if that's still valid.
We use some categories that
Yeah.
speak to capital
But
projects.
it might cover like the planning.
So we talked about that as like a potential process improvement for this year before knowing
Right.
what the need is right now. So
Yeah, I would say that's off the table for
for right now,
normal grant funding, but then we look at it case by case for this,
Yeah,
given scenario.
I'm trying to think of examples. And there are capital expenses even sometimes that are not capital projects.
Just like if a small organization's furnace
Yeah.
got flooded
Could get nuanced, yeah.
you know,
so moving on into the actual application questions.
Sarah, can I ask about the recovery categories
Yes.
and how these were worked on? It seems to me, I apologize when you were going past it, Matt, so that's why. It seems to me a couple of them are kind of squishy, and some of them are really concrete in terms of just not to go into the details. Recovery expenses, naming them, evaluating hazardous materials, coordinating this, really get specific to help you. But then, especially in the health and social services and education, it's a little squishier.
Yep.
And I understand why, right? When we're talking about kids who are impacted, I could write pretty much any of the after-school programs in a way that reflects that. This isn't meant as a criticism of that at all for organizations that would do that. But how do we make, if these are all intended to be recovery related, in those swisher areas, which I think really are health and social services and education, which Rachel indicated may be folded under health and human services anyway, so that, how do we not make it squishy? And it's not that I have an easy answer to that. I'm not actually proposing.
I have a couple of ideas.
Yes.
One is some tweaks that we can make. Remember the slide that I had that showed like examples? We can put some examples under. Additionally, if we don't feel like it's loud and clear enough that all projects must directly connect to Helene Recovery, we look at that, make sure that that's explicitly stated. And then what about having a scoring item where you can write how strong we believe the connection is?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. For this cycle, obviously, yes, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, because, all kids, in the way, all kids were impacted by COVID, all kids in the area have been impacted behaviorally, emotionally, by the storm and by what's happened societally around the storm. So I could write any proposal in this area that's been, we've had before, I could write for.
The education work groups have talked about certain topics more than others, wellness, trauma, mental health and behavioral health have come up as a strong theme of their conversations. They're not talking a ton about learning loss because the closure wasn't too long. They have talked about student homelessness. So there will be some linkages that are strong and some that are less obvious, and so having that scale to be able to score on makes sense.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, in the end, it's up to the committee to decide whether it's a recovery thing or not.
I think that's fair, and I think the grading, the scoring part is great, but I think sharpening our language means people won't waste their time putting something
Right,
forward that
that's
will
true,
not be
too.
consideration, especially at the time when there are other grants they can be applying for.
So I have a question, sorry, I wasn't gonna bring this up, but some of our priority scoring is really gonna in practical terms would relate to what things are already well covered by grants or funds that the city already has. And I think using the example of debris management, I mean, is there any way that we can clarify to the applicants or to the committee that where the biggest gaps are in each of these areas? Or, because otherwise, I think we're opening ourselves up to a lot of projects that we look at, if we were to look at them and say, okay, this is where the county really has some funding that's gonna be reimbursed by FEMA, so we don't want to give organizations funding for things that are already going to be covered. And I think that's a really tricky point, but I think we should try to figure that out.
So just to echo that, and I think we agree with that largely, I think the clarity comes now. You know, we're actually defining things out, what we're gonna, not on the back end where we're saying, well, could they go elsewhere for money? I think that's not our job. But if we could include, put in things or remove things in these definitions and descriptions, then that makes sense.
We will try to tighten it up,
Yeah.
but also we need to give ourselves some grace that this is a fast moving situation.
I just want to ask the question again about whether, I mean, do all these categories, is it important that we maintain all these categories and fund some component of all these categories? Because I see education, health, and social services and housing as being potentially huge categories that could absorb most of the funding, you know, and, you know, we could have so many applications, it's hard to get through the month of applications. And we might overlook some other really important investments that need to be made in the other categories where there's probably less just funding and grants available. So I just wanted to raise that issue. If we need all of these categories, or if there a way to address some of this could be to limit some of them.
Staff will commit to tightening it up and providing specific examples in addition to merging those two. Trying to make sure that we're removing anything that other funding sources within Buncombe County is covering, like early childhood or housing development. And then in terms of removing an entire category beyond education, I'm not sure how open leadership is going to be to that, because they want the full kind of recovery framework.
And that would be a big conversation on this committee, just to say. I'm sure there are things available, but there are things that are not available that nonprofits would be covering. Those in fact have been large categories that this committee has funded in the past. I don't see why that would skew away from that during a time of recovery. These are especially important to invest in, and understanding some of the programs you mentioned, Amy. Certainly in the communities I'm working in, it's not that that's getting everything done.
We do want to be best stewards of this resource that we have to add into the mix of what's available for recovery. And staff will try to equip the applicants and the committee as best as possible.
I hate to keep beating a dead horse, but I think that's kind of what I was getting at when I was, suggesting you guys are already overwhelmed, tremendous amount of work. I commend you for all that you've done and are doing. But you have the capacity to sort of read through, in particular, debris management. To me, that's kind of vague. And knowing that the county has already contracted significant amounts of money, potentially getting reimbursed by FEMA to do extensive debris management. How do we avoid programs that are accidentally overlapping?
We do have the capacity to tighten up the language, provide specific examples, and try to give clarity that to give the clarity to the applicants. What we don't have the capacity to do is to go through and map all the different funding sources by category. So just leaving the open-ended language in is probably going to be the default in some of the categories.
What it also does is gives a bouquet of all the things the county is doing for their citizens.
Okay, you've got a question for the guest who's in the room, it's a kind of.
I'm sorry,
your call.
I'll excuse myself after, I apologize, I'm not a member of the committee, but, just offering an outsider's perspective that was kind of looking at the grants and kind of introducing myself, but, I think there's a whole new kind of demographic now, that, like, you know, the homeowners that didn't have second homes, that, were impacted, that had that, like, that's a whole new kind of, thing, and I think one of the categories that's missing is kind of like the harder to quantify, like a sense of identity. And, you know, I'm talking to a lot of my neighbors and stuff like that, people are getting bought out, all this stuff, but this is a critical time to kind of make people feel, you know, and that's kind of more about like kind of art, you know, it's kind of harder to quantify kind of funding category, but it's really, it's placemaking, which is a pretty big, you know, nonprofit annual thing, but, again, I'm not that, I'm more in the, you know, art world, but, I think the placemaking, the identity, and really in my personal, experience, what I enjoyed the recovery process as soon as you got out of the house and you saw that everybody was going through it. When, you know, the people in the food lines, it was all the demographics. And so it's really, I think the timing is critical, you know, before the buyouts happen, before all the people that have the infrastructure to ask for grants, take all the funding, because there's a lot of people that have new ideas and new perspectives on it. They just don't have the know-how. And, you know, they're just complaining about it at the bars, they're complaining about it at the grocery store, but they just, you know, they're not doing anything about it. And so it's just, I think it's a critical time that they don't move away, you know, because that's kind of the heart and soul of the city. And I think, you know, we're kind of not missing that a bit, because, you know, with these buyouts, that's tempting. But, you know, these are the people that are gonna feel a sense of belonging in the city in 10 years, in 20 years. You know, it's sort of going through that hardship that makes a city's identity. And so it's like, I knew a lot of people from Katrina that moved to Texas, and, you know, New Orleans is not at all what it was. And so it's like, we really run the risk of doing that. And now's the time before big money comes in from Atlanta, Charlotte, you know, these developers. And I just would hate to see that happen here. And it's sort of inevitable, but I lived in Charleston before, and, you know, you just kind of see the, I guess, red line or whatever it is, but it just would take away what makes the city special, you know? So.
Really appreciate it,
Yep.
thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
So we have 10 minutes left in this meeting. And I want to remind everyone, these are big questions. This is all new. This is, you know, staff, committee members, county leadership, like everyone is trying to do the best they can and figuring this all out together and making the best decisions. And I also want to remind everyone that this fund right now is $900,000. You know, we're not working with millions. So all we can do is the best that we can with that funding. So with that being said, like we're not gonna be like making world-changing things right now. And I just wanna make sure that we are doing the best that we can with what we have here. So in order to get the application out, make sure that our community partners are able to apply for funding, I really wanna make sure that we have what we need to open the application.
Get us through it.
And I appreciate every single question, comment, you know, thought. There's so much that goes into all this.
And when I put in the language from the social determinants of health under health and social services, there is some social and community context pieces that might speak to that commenter's or suggestion.
And I just wanted to say, with the feedback that the group was given, you know, I think, speaking for me, I totally trust staff to take those next steps. I really respect the public comments. Sounds
We
familiar?
had two members of the community attend our meeting, that's
Yeah.
wonderful.
It's not something. And Rachel, if that can be reflected, because we do know those stories from elsewhere, and we can anticipate that, and to the extent that that can be part of even the county's language, to let people who are from this community stay in this community. And it really struck me just personally that the people who really rose up and helped their neighbors, so those people invested here, right? Who didn't have the chance to move to their second home or whatever. But even if they did, they stayed here to work and help their neighbors. And those are people we definitely, to the extent we can, understand the limits of the program. We at least want to have a language about seeing it.
So I think what I'll do is just highlight the changes that we made to that application, in terms of the questions that we're asking or the proposed changes, so that you all you're familiar with what we're looking at and what we anticipate sending out. So a new thing this year is the organization overview. So this is kind of a very brief snapshot of what the organization does as a whole. So I know that that's been feedback from the committee in the past. Like, I don't have the time to go to every single organization's website and, get an understanding of what they do when they're doing an application. So this is gonna be like a quick snapshot, 2 to 3 sentences. Project overview, again, this is a quick snapshot, so this is different than what we've asked before. This is an elevator pitch for the project. 2 to 3 sentences, just give us a snapshot, and then walk us through the project plan. What will that entail? How will it work? Who will it serve? How does it directly correlate to the impacts of Hurricane Helene? Including the language that we've used before about specific activities and milestones, and also asking about collaborative partners critical to the project's success, because we know that collaboration has been a huge part of the work that the community is doing. We're still asking about service locations, which is different than that initial geographic data point that we're including in that demographic data form. For results, we're still asking for proposed results, but we're making it more explicit this time in hopes of kind of simplifying the whole process for everyone. So 3 to 5 proposed performance measures, which is what is included in their reports, their quarterly reports, if they are funded. We gave an example of what that could look like, just bullet points, like bite-sized pieces, which will hopefully help them be able to share those results and help this committee understand what they're hoping to achieve. Equity, we kind of simplified that one because I know that again, that's one where we've tried to do a lot with it. And we very much simplified it for the use of this particular fund. How is your organization going to incorporate an equity lens in carrying out the project? And then providing the county's definition of equity. Organizational capacity has changed a little bit too. That's been kind of more of an open-ended one in the past. This is very specific. Who are the key personnel that are going to be involved in managing this project, and what's their ability to carry out? So we'll change that from a total score of 25 to a total score of 30 with 6 questions. And staff will go ahead and create that scoring matrix, change that a little bit to tweak the language to make it specific to how we propose questions in application. That was quick and dirty, y'all, but hopefully that gave a good overview.
I thought those were, I read through it earlier in the meeting. I thought those were really excellent changes. Thank you for the work.
So when do we anticipate that people actually receiving the money?
So that would be in our next fiscal year. So contracts start on July 1st of this year, 2025.
Right.
So that's something that staff works with them on their contracts. There are several different options for how they receive the money. They can either get an upfront payment if they need that, like a lump sum where they just are given the funds and then they have to report on it throughout the year. They can get monthly reimbursement or quarterly reimbursements with their reports, or some combination of the two.
Is there a place where that's identified to them so they have an idea?
Yeah.
Of when they might, so they won't write a project because they need money in April?
Yes, so that's the grant guidelines, which we will share with this committee once we have them finalized, which I think we have several changes that we need to make to them, so I think we'll probably have them done next week. And we'll definitely send another email to all of all folks who have applied for a county fund in our grant software, letting them know that applications are opening, with the grant guidelines, where to find more information, grant consultation links, all of that. But we'll share it with the committee as well.
And we can share that information with anybody that we can find that might need it.
Absolutely. Yep, and we actually rely on this committee to share that information as we're able.
And so I know you'll do this, just when it's going out in the public, social media is up, to let us know that, because I don't want to share it before things are ready,
Yeah, absolutely.
especially with the changes.
And a direct email for those that don't participate in social media.
Yes. We'll work with Kate to get all of the names of different ways to get it out there. We also had someone in our equity office asked to have like printed flyers that she can put out in the community, so we'll have lots of different ways.
And I think I just want to say to Angelica and Sarah and Angela, who's not in the room, and Rachel, I hope, and I think we all recognize what a difficult time it's been, and the incredible amount of work that's come through here, shining through here, and really good work. And thank you all.
Well, it's been wonderful to have a full committee. We have a full committee here today. And to get to see everyone, Dr. Russell, to have you join us virtually. And, I know that this has been something where we've been kind of like, stop, go for a while, but I'm really grateful that we're in a place where we can just.
And we're all able to get here. We've got our driveways back, we've got our bridges back.
Yeah, everyone
I
is
didn't have to walk.
here. Yes.
I appreciate the communication of, we're gonna pause this month. We're still doing stuff, but it was a nice little insight into, I know the county's busy buzzing.
We were gonna try for
Do your
December,
thing.
and then we were,
Oh no, like do your thing and then we'll get together when it's time. So I appreciate that. Those emails are always from Sarah, like, what are you doing today? She said, hey, we're going. That was good. Thank you for that.
But I do think, thank you, Ray, for that feedback. I think that this is in a good place and hopefully we can get important funds out to our community partners who are doing super critical work and have been since day one, boots on the ground.
All right. Yeah, we'll bring it to a close. Thanks, everybody, and see you soon. And our next meeting will be at the regular date and time, which is February 6th.
February 6th.
1 o'clock. Which is also the deadline to apply for FEMA individual assistance.
And here it is.
There's a